So these are examples of the first, this is a project that these guys made. So the people who just left were taking an introductory blacksmithing course. So I'll show you what we start out with. We start out with a piece of 3/8 inch round, which are on the table here. Start out with something about like this here, right, 3/8 inch rounds. And then I give people a spare one, and first they try to forge out a long taper, a pointed taper, like something that's fine point like that, a tip.
How hard is it to make that curl round?
Okay, so a guy who came and did his handle like this probably spent about 3 hours making that. But it's his first time forging it, right?
So
it would take us something like half an hour. He did everything.
So you have to keep heating it so you plan to get the shape you want?
Yeah. So with something like this, what you do is you draw the end of the bar out so it's pointed, and then you make a little tiny curly Q, and you basically roll it up on itself like a licorice, right? So then you've got a flat spiral, and then I take it over to another simple tool that we make. It's just a piece of 1/2 inch round bar with a dome end on it.
Can you put the dome on?
Yeah. We clamp that in the vise like this, and then you have your spiral, and this supports it, and you take a hammer and heat it up, and you hammer, and as you hammer, the material moves down. It's the same as it moving up.
What kind of metal is that?
Mild steel. Yeah. So it's a really low, it's a carbon steel, but it's a really low carbon steel.
So it will bend fairly easily?
You can, yeah, you can bend higher carbon steel fairly easily too. It's just a bit harder to work.
And is it more heat to do it, or just more physical labor?
Same amount of heat.
More physical labor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll take, if you look at these tools here. So these are there's a flat chisel and a curved chisel and a center punch.
So I like to touch things. So.
Yeah, for sure. So you can feel the ends of these, right? So one is curved, one is straight, and the ends are like not super sharp, right? You can run your thumb along there without cutting it. So these are the main tools that we have at a workstation for a student, and we make these all out of Coil Spring from vehicles, right? So I've got some straps up here. So we'll cut this into little pieces with a zip disc.
Okay, I'm impressed because you're going from coil to straight.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we'll also, the forging hammers, the main forging hammers that we have, we've made all of these. We've made all of these. And we make those out of S-cam, so another truck part.
There's a wedge. You see it? So they've actually put a wedge in it? Ooh. So that does not matter.
So for that, we'll cut a chunk of that, like that. Then we drill a hole in it. And then we have a slitting chisel, so we slit it open, right? So you can make the hole for the hammerhead. And then we use a drift that we drive through there, and the drift shapes the inside of the hole.
Is this wood split when you push it up to put the wedge in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, which would be smart.
Right. Yeah.
Wow, that makes sense.
So this is also something that the students will make in the tool making course. So we get them all to make a hammer like this, and then some of them will make something even more elaborate. Yeah. So we make a lot of tooling. Even this hammer here, this hammer we made. It's called a flatter.
There's a little bit of weight to that.
Yeah. So a hammer like this is used, for example. I'll show you. Do this. First, I forged this under the power hammer to taper it, right? And then I hammered on the corners to create that chamfer. But the dies I was using are a little bit rounded, so I end up with these overlapping rounded pieces. So then what we do is I heat it up and I hold it like this on the anvil. And then I get Amy, who works with me, to take the sledgehammer and to strike, and then we smooth it all out. So we do the flat surface, and then we clean up.
Okay, but that's a lot of wrist work. Like that's like doing a wrist curl.
I'm not hammering with this, I'm holding onto it.
Oh,
I'm just holding onto it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Because that would
I mean, we make things as easy as we can for us, right? We're not,
Yeah, so
you
do it
get
for
tired and
hours.
you get lazy in other years, you'll get injured if you're not careful.
How much pressure or
I don't actually know what the force is. The weight of the hammer coming down is 132 pounds. And I don't know once you add the speed to it, but it's a lot. Yeah. I can show you if you want. Sure. I'd have to turn the fan on in order to get the piece off.
this is actually better. I'll pick this up so we don't trip on it though.
Good
Where would you
idea.
like me to put it?
Maybe put it on that table over here.
Did you make the grooves?
No, that's a part of a chuck axle,
I just think that's great.
so it's harder material.
Because there's all that
It's
stuff
free,
sitting there,
basically.
rusting,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's never going to get used unless you
The
do
reason I
this.
started using a lot of that is that I had a friend, I have a friend who studied, well, he did an apprenticeship in what was more about East Prussia. And so he's in his mid-70s now, I guess. And I met him when I was doing a demonstration in front of Kitchener City Hall at Chris Kindle Market.
Oh,
and
right.
he said, anyway, he told me everything I was saying was wrong. So this is horse, and but anyway, I got to know him and I've learned a lot from him. And one year we were working on a gate that we needed to slit and drift. It was all put together with mortise and tenon joinery and slitting and drifting. And so I asked him, I said, oh, what should we use for tool steel? He said, oh, tool steel. He said, just get some torsion bar or stabilizer bar from a car and use that to make your tools. He said, because it's really tough and it's really forgiving. So that's why I started using it.
This is what we're talking about.
And then coil spring, as you can see here, is also what we'll use. So we'll cut this into pieces when it's cold, and then we'll take the curved pieces and turn them into tools like this. So chisels and punches. So you can punch out a 1/4 inch round hole in a hot piece of steel in, I don't know, less than a minute with a tool like that. And then we use this chisel here, which is straight. This one is curved just a little bit. We use a straight chisel to cut the end of a piece of bar in order to split it, or we'll use it so you can actually
So
go.
you don't want it super sharp then?
No, you don't.
But
want it
you
super
could
sharp.
make it sharper if you needed it sharper.
You wouldn't need it sharper, because what you're
It is
using,
sharp.
you're mainly using the heat in the material and the force to drive this into it. And you want a tool, what's more important about it being sharp is that it's narrow, because you're not trying to deform a really wide section, right? So
Right.
you make it narrow, and then you can drive it into the material. But it means that if it's narrow, the heat's going to be transferred also from the piece that you're trying to slit into, so you have to take it out, cool it.
So it's a little bit of a process.
Yes, yeah. And then you have to make sure that the tool, once you go far enough into the material, it'll start to jam. And so what you do then is you take coal dust and you cool it off in water, and then you stick it in the coal dust, and then you stick it in the piece, and that's what prevents it from getting stuck. It acts as a lubricant. It's graphite, basically. Yeah. So we do make a lot of tools. So there are 8 sets of all these tools and center punches that are made for all of the forging stations.
So you have 8
We
students?
teach. Yeah, we have a maximum of 8 students at a time.
And that's why they eat
Yeah.
tools.
Yeah. That's why there are 4 forges, so you can have one person working on either side of the forge.
I thought of that, and that's why that metal stops there, so they can use either side.
That's right, yeah. Or if we're working longer bars, right, sometimes we need to go all the way across the forge. Longest pieces we ever forged were, I think the longest pieces we made were 17 feet high. They're on a rail, set of driveway gates over at the
Like
hacienda.
thin or
No.
big?
Yeah. The posts on that gate were made out of 2.5 inch square
How much
bar
weight is that?
block. I had a crane set up in my shop, and so we were lifting it with the crane.
Yeah. 'cause
Using the power hammer.
17
The hardest
feet
part
is-
of that job was straightening those out. So we chiseled designs into the surface, and as you're working, the material starts to bend. So you look down the length of it, and you pick it up to see if you could, see if it's straight. And if you hammer there, hammer here. So this bench over here, actually, we bolted that to the floor, and we used that as our flat surface for straightening out these bars, because they were, I don't know, 12, 10 feet high maybe, I can't remember, something like that.
Well, there's your weight training again.
That's right. And that's why we built the propane forge over there, so you can get, the inside of the propane forge is about, I don't know, I'm gonna say 18 inches deep, and about, well, it's not 12 inches wide, and then about 10 inches high. So we managed to actually heat up a section of train track from the light rail, because we did the project for the Ion, for the stop across from Grand River Hospital.
I'm looking for a track.
So we heated a section off. No, we lifted it by hand. It was only, I don't know, it was only 8 feet long. Lifted it by hand, and we rolled it into the forge with rollers, and then we pulled it out over this really heavy table. We put it underneath something that we had a stop clamped to the table, and then Bronson, who was the heaviest out of us, sort of bounced on it, and we moved it and curved it just to the right curve. Like, oh yes, that looks great. And then we looked at it, and we realized 2 days later that we curved it in the wrong direction. So it already milled, or it already had some machining done at the other end of it. No, we had to take it over to a machine shop and get the holes put at the other end of it. Anyway, it worked. So there's, a lot of big stuff we put through that propane forge. Well, big for us.
Still a lot of weight. I'll ask you about tracks later, because I don't see it. But, so you got started in this by taking courses?
Yeah, well, I got started in it because a friend of mine, Christine Lake, that I'd met at University of Waterloo in a fine art program in a painting class. She called me up one day, and she was working at Artifacts in St. Jacobs. So that's a business where they take, demolish buildings and save interesting pieces and then sell them off for people to either use in their homes or restoration projects or make into new furniture. And so Robert Brown, who was working there at the time, he does glass work. He was renting space from Artifacts. He set up a forge because he was making fused glass lights, and he wanted to make lamps out of them. So he built a forge so that he could then make the metal part to make floor standing and chandeliers and that kind of thing. So they had a forge set up, and Christine said, oh, you should come try this. So they were very open. They didn't mind me coming into their business. They didn't really know who I was. And I would go in there on Mondays when they were closed, and I would play around on the forge and make crappy little hooks. And so I decided that I wanted to do more of it. So Robert and Christine and I set up a shop out in Baden. And so I would go there. I think around that time is when I started, I took my first blacksmithing course from Dean Peisner in St. Jacobs.
But you already had an idea how to do it.
Not at all. I was playing around the forge. I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to make a point on a thing and make a hook. I didn't know. Yeah, they're pretty.
So the courses did help.
Oh, I learned a lot. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I learned how to made a rake and a poker and a shovel, something like this here, and got a lot of blisters on my hands. And then I went back about a month later to do the advanced course, which was tool making, which is where we learned how to make chisels and punches and a scroll jig. And I have one of the tools right here. I also made this in that course, so I still have that. That would have been, I don't know, 28, 29 years ago. So this is a rivet heading tool. So you can put this in a vise, right? But what you do to make this is you have 2 pieces of steel, and you put a couple of pieces of paper in between that, and then you clamp them together, and you TIG weld, or you MIG weld, whatever, either end, and then you drill your holes. And then when you take it apart, the hole is not quite big enough for the size of diameter of hole, so that when this gets squeezed in the vise, it grips onto the round bar.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
I don't want to take it completely apart. There's actually little bolts, I guess you call them?
Yeah,
pins.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Just
you can
so it
see
registers it again, right? So you
that
can
is
put it
neat,
back
because it
together
looks
again.
like it's magic. It looks like, oh, I'm doing this, and then I'm putting
Tell
it
you,
back
everything
together.
felt like magic when I first started doing it too. I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance when I was in, grade 8 or whatever, and after that I was motivated to take my bicycle apart. So I take my bike apart and put it back together again, because I realized, oh, there's a way that I can map out how to lay the pieces out. I thought that was just the coolest thing. But the best part about that book was what he talked about using a aluminum pop can as a shim for his handlebars on his motorcycle. So, and actually one of the first things that I made that I was really excited about when we had our first shop set up is that I borrowed a chainsaw from my friend Andre, who's a woodworker, and I was using the chainsaw so I cut down wood so that I could split it so I could heat the shop so I could forge. Right? And I was out there and I was starting it up and I stepped and put my foot through and I went to pull it on and I broke the trigger off with my boot. I guess it was really cold outside. It was in the snow. And oh my God, I have to fix that somehow. I went and drove her all around town. There was no internet at the time, right? Trying to find the new part. Anyway, in the end, I couldn't find the part. It was an old chainsaw, so I thought, well, I guess I just have to take it apart and fix it. So I took it apart and I looked at the plastic piece that had been, and I found a piece of flat bar that was the same dimension and drilled holes in the ground and put it back in and it worked.
So you were made to be a blacksmith.
And that wasn't forging. That was all just, cold working
I know,
material.
but if you look at the variety of tools that you've made and that you'd have to learn what each one does,
Yeah.
that's a long process. So I'm assuming you have to love this to do it.
You definitely have to love
And
it to
there's
do
a lot
it.
of physical
You do not
labor.
make a lot of money doing any kind of physical labor. Anybody who's a craftsperson, North America or any sort of Western country, we have such high standard of living, right? So we need to make a lot of money to buy all the stuff that we think we need. And I don't get my clothes handmade, right? I buy cheaper clothes. And so it's,
You mean the working clothes or just clothes?
Period.
Just
Yes.
period.